my colleagues, we have returned from recess. I would ask the Sergeant Arms to first swear in the Chief of the Guam Fire Department first and his staff. Thank you, Sergeant Arms. I'd like to advise my colleagues that we do have present now. Chief Stone is here. He was able to make it here. And the other two individuals, we're still trying to make contact with them. I did mention to my colleagues that the message I got was that they're preparing their skilled nursing unit and whatever. But I'd like to ask the chief to please maybe, because this is in reference to the bill. Are you aware of this bill, sir? No, you're not. Okay, maybe, but if you can just state your name for the record. Well, once we start, but I think the issues we're more concerned about, what Senator Therese was asking is, are we getting prepared? Are we stuff like that? And maybe they can give a rundown, because I know that they're working close to public health and GMH and what's going on.
Mr. Chair, just a point of inquiry.
Yes, ma'am.
When you requested for public health and they responded that they're preparing the skilled nursing unit, does that mean the director is physically there preparing the skilled nursing unit?
That's correct. That's the message I got, that she was part of that. And that's why I'm not going to question what the
Is there a
director's
deputy on board at public health?
The oversight chair can comment on that one, but it's no different.
So the whole leadership at the top is going down to prepare a skilled nursing unit? Is that what it is?
So
that means there's no policy in place, so they're doing like standard operating procedures on the go?
Well, I'd leave that to the oversight chair to explain whatever's going on in her agencies, but I know for a fact that public health, just for everybody's information, that you remember when public health burned down or got a fire or whatever damage they had, they moved over to the same building I'm at. They took over 3 floors. And I did see the director there and the deputy director and all the management people, because they're helping move their equipment into the building. And hopefully soon, maybe probably this week, or no later than next week, the vital statistics will be over on the first floor in Tumuning. I think the food stamp or the SNAP program is moving there on the 2nd floor, and the lab is on the 3rd floor in Tumuning. And I know, and they were doing a lot of training and upgrading of their equipment. So we can get, I would refer to the oversight chair to maybe we can call a roundtable so they can give us an update of where they're at. But I have the chief of the fire department here that will give us an update exactly where are they at in reference to the possible coronavirus. Chief, maybe if you can just state your name and your staff of you so we can know who you are.
Absolutely. Hafen, good evening, Senators. First, I'd like to start off by extending my sincerest apologies for not being here earlier. But I'm certain you might be aware that earlier we were already handling a couple of PUIs or patients under investigation. And so that took my attention away, and so please accept my apologies for not being here. But I'm happy to be here to answer any questions that you might have to the best of my abilities. So as I understand the question, Senator, it's, I'm sorry? Oh, my apologies. My name is Daniel Stone. I'm the Fire Chief of the Guam Fire Department.
I'm Darren Burrier, Assistant Fire Chief, EMS Operations Training Bureau.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not aware of what the bill is that you have before this body, but I'm happy to provide you whatever information or updates that I can as it relates to, from what I understand, our response to potential COVID-19 incidents. So I'm not sure what it is you're looking for or what questions you might have.
Chief Stone, the bill is Bill 308-35, an act to add a Article 14 to Chapter 1, Division 1 of Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to creating an emergency pandemic fund to establish the administrative parameters needed to expend on any emergency derived in the event of an outbreak of a pandemic on Guam. And the coronavirus was one of the base for that. Okay, so Mr. Byrne had provided you a copy of it, but maybe you can tell us about where do you believe the fire department stands, or any of the agencies that you're associated with that responds to this?
So thank you for the question. So it's been several weeks that the administration has gathered all of our stakeholders, our partners with regards to public health and response. And we've been feverishly working together to, one, address potential responses, what that plan was going to be. We actually spent a couple of days, full 8-hour days, 2 days in a row, about a week ago at the hotel to review our pandemic plan. There was obviously a need to readdress the plan, as it has been quite a while since we used that particular annex. So we blew the dust off and we turned pages, and we methodically went through the plan to address and update the plan as needed. I think we wound up coming out with a very good product at the end. We addressed a lot of points. We had a lot of key people involved in the discussion, to include our non-government organizations, everybody that we can think of that would potentially be in support of or in response to a pandemic, more specifically to coronavirus.
Mr. Chair, are we asking questions now?
Yes, you may ask, but I'd like to also recognize Assistant Chief Chaco, correct? And then just turn on the mic. And he's also already been sworn in. So does any of my colleagues have any questions on the chief or his personnel? They're here to, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. There was, inside this bill, I guess you haven't had an opportunity to really read the bill, so hopefully through this conversation you'll be glancing through it or maybe go step by step. But according to the section in the bill where it talks about what the funds should be used for and its purpose, it states here that it shall be for purchasing screening equipment, medical supplies, leasing quarantine facilities, and Chief, it's on page 3 of the legislation. If you can go to page 3, letter B. And like I said, it's purchasing screening equipment, medical supplies, leasing quarantine facilities, immediate hiring of healthcare professional, emergency personnel, and activation of Guam National Guard. Now, based on your symposium in the last couple days, as you were going through it, I was there and I saw you there, especially in that particular first day in that meeting. Was there anything other than what's listed here that you may need that we can incorporate on use of this funding that could be spent under your department, something that's not here currently?
So the answer to your question, Senator, is as I'm reading through that section B on page 3, it looks like it addresses all the areas that we have already been discussing over the past several weeks. And there is definitely a plan to address all of these areas that is mentioned, that is outlined in this particular bill, in this section.
How about vehicles?
As far as transport vehicles, is that what you're?
Yes, I don't see anything under the, especially in your line of work, transportation is very important in an emergency situation. So is there anything in here that we can include that's not incorporated in here?
So
And I know it puts you on the spot right now, but if, later on you come up with it, please let us know. But
absolutely.
Currently, like right now, is like vehicles, for instance, is not included in here.
So at present for vehicles, the Guam Fire Department has always been challenged with maintaining the fleet, but we've done a very good job as far as the ambulances are concerned at maintaining that fleet. So we do fluctuate anywhere between 7 and 6 ambulances on any given day. Which is enough to maintain our mission requirements and our response times. But
Are any of them retrofitted for an epidemic? Is any of the ambulances retrofitted for this type of epidemic?
So for this particular epidemic, we treat it like any other potential epidemic. So for especially like TB or SARS or MERS or anything else, for the most part, it's just the protection of our medics that are in response, and then it's going to be the cleanup after we handle a patient and transfer them off to a treatment facility, which we do on a daily basis anyway, even through our normal course of duty and our normal transports, if there's such a thing as a normal transport. But our crews are very well-versed and very prepared to be able to do that sterilization to return that medic back into service.
So, Chief, you do have the I want to say the get-up, but the the hooded hat and
The PPEs?
What are they called, sir?
PPE, so
PPEs.
personal protective equipment.
Right. And then do you also have the facility in which once they've handled somebody who has the virus, go into another chamber that it's sprayed down? So
you're talking about decontamination itself?
Yeah, decontamination room. Do you have that too?
So we don't have it, but the receiving facilities have those mechanisms in place. So there are decontamination areas of both GMH and GRMC.
Okay.
So once one of the attendants is completed with the patient transfer over to the receiving facility, there is a separate isolated room that they can go ahead and do that decontamination, where they would be either removing protective gear, doing the sanitation, hand sanitizing and things of that nature so to make them safe as much as the patient was.
So what you're saying is that you have all these things already in place. So you have the decontamination room, you have the suits already prepared, because that's not incorporated in this section here. And if we need to incorporate something, this is an opportunity.
So as far as PPEs are concerned, there is a stress on the supply system, but that's not just indicative to Guam. That's throughout the nation. So there is a high demand for a lot of these PPEs, and so working with the administration, working with our stakeholders, we are doing everything we can to address those needs. We've been collaboratively working together to share resources. So as the example today, with the 2 responses that we had, both of our ambulance crews were properly fitted with PPEs. We have those PPEs available. And yeah, we were absolutely prepared to respond to these 2 events today.
Okay. I guess I'm going to allow my other colleagues to speak on, probably the manner in which this was handled today for these 2 incidents, but as we move on, if there's anything in here, so I probably would make an amendment to include the PPDs, because that's not specific as far as some of the equipment needed. I mean, it does say screening equipment, but you're saying screening equipment. PPDs are not screening equipment, so I'd like to incorporate something. But as we move on, I'll add that amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Senator, Madam Speaker?
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I want to thank you, Chief, and to the other officials here in Dunklin, for what you do for our island, but more importantly, wanting to make sure that as we and the rest of the world are going through this pandemic outbreak, I just want to share with you, I want to make sure that from equipment to the needs of our government of Guam officials that need to be the first frontline responders, that they have the necessary equipment that they need to make sure that we're prepared to move, that we're prepared to be ready for this event. So I want to ask, how many firefighters are employed by GFD right now?
So we have about 223 firefighters currently in the ranks.
Okay. So we talked about 223, right?
Yes.
And we talked about the protective personnel equipment, right? The PPEs?
That's correct.
That you call them. How many PPEs are in the inventory of GFD right now? Every single one of them?
So we do not issue, for these particular items as it relates to this particular response, as the example, disposable gowns, eye shields, gloves, and what we call booties. We don't issue them to every firefighter. They are actually pre-positioned on each of our ambulances. So So if there is the potential for exposure, they have it readily available, and they can don those PPEs as needed. But that's based on the determination. If a patient presents and they meet certain criteria, then of course they would, after receiving that information from our 911 call center, that would kind of be the trigger for them to get those PPEs donned before they make the patient contact.
Okay. So you are saying, so I guess the question was, the 223 employees, firefighters, you just have a set an amount and not for every single firefighter.
That is correct.
And if the outbreak were to be larger than what is needed, will GFD need to order, or are you saying that there's enough supply to be, and then I'm just trying to be proactive here.
And I appreciate the question. So what it is there's, like I said, there's several collaborative efforts happening, so several lines of effort. Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, Department of Public Health and Social Services, as well as the Office of Civil Defense, Homeland Security. We have made our needs aware to all three of those agencies, and they are working collectively to try and fill all those needs. Again, the strain is on the resource, not just locally, but that's nationwide. So they are working very diligently to find those vendors that are going to be able to provide those protective equipment to us. Not just to us, because there are obviously other people in the healthcare industry that need that as well. So it is a very much a collaborative effort trying to get those items. But to answer your question, at present, we have enough in inventory to address any responses that we have right now. But because these are disposable items, we do need to replenish them. And so it is very much a resource sharing effort that's going on right now until we can get those clear lines of supply back reestablished for us. Not reestablished, but established.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, I just have...
So all firefighters are trained to the hazmat awareness level. Not all of them are awareness and operations level.
Okay, so has there been any refresher courses done internally by your station commanders to date and getting more to be certified?
So that is an ongoing thing. So training is not just a single event. It's something that is we do sustainment training. So each one of the officers in charge are OICs, especially those that are dual-hatted in suppression response as well as the hazmat response, do recurring training to maintain, because it is a perishable skill, and as such, if they don't if they don't go out and train on it, they'll lose that skill. And so the effort is always in keeping that skill set very fresh. So there is a sustainment training that always happens.
Thank you very much, Chief. Maybe I want to ask just one more question, Mr. Chair, if I may, is when was the last pandemic response drill done? I just want to make sure that our heroes continue to be safe. And
So we did do the tabletop last week,
Okay.
and that was something that was obviously addressed after we went and opened up the pandemic response plan. We made those revisions and updates. We actually exercised the plans that we all came together to update, and actually did a tabletop exercise and presented several scenarios to make sure that the plan that we had come together, that we have updated, is actionable, executable, and feasible.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I just want to say to the firefighters, and I would continue to call our heroes. I'm a little bit biased here. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all that you do for our community. I want to thank you and your family for knowing, because I know that it's not easy. You're on your shifts and what you have to do out there, especially with what's happening. So I just want to say thank you. And Mr. Chair, I want to say thank you for really taking the time to have the Guam Fire Department here.
All
Thank
right,
you, Madam
thank you. I'd like to just advise my colleagues that the message I have is that The Director of Public Health and GMH is currently in a meeting with the governor. They were handling 3 cases. 3 grave cases in reference to what we're trying to deal with tonight. And that they're not able to make it. So I'm going to leave that at that. Madam Vice Speaker, do you have any questions you want to pose on the chief?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for clarifying that, because, you know, it's important for the public to know that our government agencies are working in the best interest of the community and the people. And Chief, I want to thank you for coming in today. And
Thank
I'd
you,
like to
ma'am.
thank all your staff also for the enormous amount of work that they do and the movements that you've made to quickly address this situation and to put mitigating actions in place. I do want to ask, what was the purpose of transporting the patients from GRMC to GMH?
So, based on previous discussions, what we don't want, when I say we, I mean the collective, all the partners that are in the meetings that we've been having over the past several weeks. What we don't want to do with somebody who has potential, because we don't know if anybody has COVID until they've actually been tested and we have a positive result. So we treat everybody as PUIs or patients under investigation. With that, the intent is not to fill our hospitals with people who may or may not have COVID-19 until they start presenting as such, or until a confirmation comes back. If we suspect, if there is a PUI that we have high suspicion of, then what we want to do is basically isolate them. So that's why there has been discussion to figure out where that isolation is going to take place, so that we do not fill our hospitals where acute care can take place in the event somebody needs that kind of treatment. And then the cross-contamination potential that exists when you have people who are in a medical facility, because that's where a lot of the patients are coming from back in the States, is usually in a clinical environment or out in the community, that 911 call from the community. So the reason was, to answer your question, Senator, I'm sorry, was because GMH has been identified. They have 2 isolation rooms with negative pressure that they can put these patients in and not potentially cross-contaminate the rest of the facility.
So I'm just trying to understand the process, right, of from when you arrive on scene to GRMC, where the patients were at, the mode of transport, the PPE that was utilized, and then the movement into GMH. And you mentioned that they had 2 isolation, what was it called, 2 isolation?
Isolation units or
So-
isolation rooms.
That had a special capacity of
Correct, they're negative pressure.
negative pressure.
Right.
And so is that per person? So each person would be in, we can only hold 2 people then?
That is correct, at GMH. It is so it's only the 2 rooms that they have at GMH.
And GRMC does not have this capability.
GRMC has 1 isolation room.
So you moved both patients,
So
or both PUIs?
So right now, as I understand it, and I would have to confirm that for you. So the first patient is actually still in isolation, and so there's actually been 3 PUI incidences today. And the second patient is actually no longer in ICU, but in urgent care. So they're doing basically a quarantine. They're going to monitor. They've already done the swabbing necessary for testing, and then they'll send that off.
So there's 3 PUIs. The 2 initial ones were at GRMC, were transported earlier today from GRMC to GMH?
So actually, so there was 1 patient from GRMC transferred to GMH. There was a second patient that was actually a 911 call in the community. And then the third patient, I believe, was at the clinic, at one of the clinics, and was identified there.
And what happened to that third patient?
So it's my understanding, and again, I'll confirm this for you. It's my understanding that they were determined that they were going to home isolate, and so public health has taken their information, and they're going to be doing frequent monitoring of them. Supervised monitoring is what they call it.
Okay. And then, so our firefighters, they transported this patient, this singular patient, to GMH.
That is correct.
Why did they do that if GRMC has the capacity for, I'm just thinking, why would you want to relocate someone to another hospital and risk transmission in the process?
I appreciate the question, Senator. So basically what the thought process behind it is to centralize patients. So in the event this winds up evolving to be a much bigger incident, we can have one facility, and if it winds up that we have to actually plus up into another facility, we have that capability. So centralizing the patients is necessary so that we don't cross-contaminate another facility unnecessarily, because we still have the regular walk-in patients that have in our communities that need to, are going to seek medical attention but are not necessarily PUIs. So it's about containing that cross-contamination, potential cross-contamination.
So you took that one patient from GRMC, moved them to GMH, where there's only 2 isolation rooms with negative pressure,
Correct?
and the reason for it was.
To centralize and isolate those patients.
And so what happens when, God forbid, what happens if another 4 people come forward that may be PUIs? Where will they go then?
So that is still a topic of discussion, and so that is exactly what Director DeNorsi and GMHA and Civil Defense, they're all working towards identifying what do we do when we need to do, if we do have to expand that capability. And that is why they are looking at the SNF, the skilled nursing facility, because that has a capacity to surge and take on additional patients.
But we've learned through data that has come in that a lot of the people that are infected and who actually succumb to this illness are people with pre-existing conditions who are ill, or
Correct.
people who are older. So why would we put them in a skilled nursing facility?
And I
Why would that
apologize.
be an
Let me
option?
clarify that. So the existing residents at the skilled nursing facility are actually being transferred from SNF to, I believe it's GRMC, on a floor that has been identified to take on those patients. Right.
So they're moving, are they clearing out the whole building of the SNF?
So that's correct. That is my understanding,
Okay.
that all the existing residents that are at SNF will be transferred over to GRMC. SNF, because it has a surge capacity of up to 60 beds.
Okay.
And then it actually is a good location because it's isolation. It's easier for control and containment.
Okay. And then what about the firefighters that transported the singular patient? Can you just walk the community through the process? Like, what PPE gear did they use, and the measures they did prior to transport and after they completed the transport to GMH?
Thank you. No, I absolutely appreciate the question and your concern for our firefighters as much as we are as the management of the Guam Fire Department. So we do have the CDC required PPEs for our medics that are doing these transports, which consists of eye protection, which is a face shield. We have an N95 mask that they've all been fit tested to. We have the disposable gowns, as well as gloves and the boots. So in these 3 cases, for high suspicion of as PUIs, they went ahead and they donned all of these PPEs. There is a procedure to do the proper donning and doffing, which our firefighters have been trained to. And as a matter of fact, we went one further and just renewed the training again. And then the effort right now, as well, is to get back out and kind of to what you were alluded to earlier, is about renewing that training again, because it's been a while since we had something of this nature. So we definitely have that training already scheduled, and we have our training bureau going out to do those refresher trainings.
And so after they dropped off the patient at GMH, I'm sure they went through an area where there's, no patients around or very little
Correct.
traffic, right? And then what process do our firemen do after they drop off the patient?
So once they've transferred the patient care over to the receiving facility and they need to come out, they go ahead and doff or take off the potentially contaminated PPEs, and there is a very clear procedure for that, and we subscribe to the CDC requirements for the proper doffing of this equipment. And so that takes place, and then they wind up sanitizing themselves as well to ensure that they've cleaned off any potential contaminants. However, what they will need to do after that is they will need to don a new set of PPEs, because now we have to decontaminate or re-sanitize the ambulance, which is a pretty labor-intensive process because it's a very thorough cleaning.
And is that exactly what transpired? Because it seems like you're speaking in principalities of the future that they need to do this, but is that what transpired in the past when they did this transport?
So that is correct,
Okay.
right.
All right, thank you very much,
Thank you for the
Chief,
questions.
and
Thank you
thank you,
very
Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the Guam Fire Department for all their hard work and their service to our community and the people.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Vice. I just asked my colleagues, good information we're getting from the police department, but let's try to stick as close to the bill as we can so we can wrap this one up. Senator Lee, you have a question, then Senator Muñoz, you're next. Senator Lee.
Sujus Masi, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Chief and team, for being here to participate in this discussion. I just wanted to give you, Chief, an opportunity to maybe clarify a statement that you made previously with regard to PUI. So you were discussing the person under investigation or patients under investigation, and it's my understanding that Adelup and our, I guess, Department of Public Health and Social Services and DPHSS officials were notified about 2 possible cases now being evaluated for COVID-19. We're saying maybe possibly 3, but it's also my understanding that these individuals did not meet the full criteria for a PUI, for a person under investigation, as determined by the Hawaii State Laboratories Division. So I just wanted to see, I just want to make sure that we're being clear about the language that we're using. Is it a PUI or is it not a PUI?
So at the initial call to the 911 call center, what winds up happening is our dispatchers have been trained to ask those pertinent questions as it relates to a patient's call for service, more specifically to a medical call for service. And then we also have added additional questions based on the CDC requirements to include other pertinent information that we would need to help us at least, we won't be able to definitively determine if somebody, but if it would raise the suspicion or raise the alertness, the alert level for our responders. So travel history is one of the bigger items that are being asked from anybody who's presenting with cough, fever, and then travel history. And so once they meet those criterias, then that is the trigger for us to let our first responders know that, hey, we need to do an elevated PPE, enhanced PPE requirement, so they know that they have to don the full ensemble for their protection. And so the 3 cases today, as the medics went out to do their assessments, and then some of the 2 were actually assessed in clinical environments, they met those criteria. Now, I will confess that this is a very dynamic event. It's changing on a regular basis, almost daily. And so what we practice today could absolutely change tomorrow just based on new information, new developments. So the charge to the personnel of the Guam Fire Department is that on a daily basis, I've asked them to please go to the CDC website, get the latest and greatest information that's out there to make sure that they have the most current information, and we're doing our due diligence as well as management because their concerns are our concerns, and their safety is paramount to us. So to answer your question, today it met the requirement for what a PUI was.
And Chief, I can certainly appreciate that you're operating out of an abundance of caution, and it's much easier to be safer than sorry than, make sure that we are deploying our first responders in a way that's going to really protect them and help to provide that service to these potential patients. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Muñoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief and Mr. Chaco and Mr. Burria for being here. I know you could and should be somewhere else rather than sitting here, but I think in relation to the bill, Mr. Chair, I think just the public hearing it straight from, part of my reference from the horse's mouth will ease some of the anxieties that's happening right now. And if you take a look at all of our chat groups, there's so much information going around now that we don't even know what to believe anymore. Some are true, some are fake news, whatever. We just don't know anymore. And people are passing it like, I mean, it's like going viral. And so having you here really helps to ease some of our anxieties. And now it's going to help us. It's going to help us understand where we're at and where we need to be. Part of the questions that I had also had already been asked. So I just wanted to find out, like, when you do a transport. So one of my questions was, first of all, why did we transport? And then when you do a transport of a PUI, what happens to those vehicles, the emergency response vehicles that you transported these PUIs in? What is the protocol for that?
The protocol for basically decontaminating or sanitizing the vehicles is what we do on a daily basis with any type of patient. So as far as to your question is, we follow the CDC guidelines for what that proper what that proper decontamination process is, which is exactly what took place today with the 2 ambulances that were involved in the transports. And so the process is, it's basically doing a lot of cleaning, and so spraying copious amounts of disinfectant, doing a lot of wiping down, ensuring that those cracks and crevices get the attention as well. It is a very labor-intensive process, which usually renders that particular ambulance out of service for probably about an hour, if not longer. That's how thorough a cleaning takes place on those ambulances.
So it basically kind of puts you a little bit of stress because maybe there are other calls happening and you don't have these vehicles to respond to that?
The Guam Fire Department deals with that on a daily basis, and so we have cover down procedures, we have overlapping areas of coverage, and so we're able to address those needs. And if we do, for whatever reason, we do exceed our capacity, our capabilities, we do have an MOU in place with our federal partners, and we can utilize their resources in the event we are challenged in that area.
And this is to include also like disinfectants and like supplies that are help to decontaminate the units.
That's correct.
Okay. Another question too, like when, I guess people are wondering, like, I want to hear straight from you, like what kind of symptoms do people have to have in order for you to be suspicious that they are a PUI?
So coronavirus presents just like the flu does. I mean, for the most part, and that's where the challenge is, and that's why the additional questions happen at our at our call center, at the 911 call center, because for COVID-19, they present with fever, cough, body aches, just not, and
very
and
normal symptoms, though,
and
right?
some respiratory distress, and so those are very much like flu symptoms. So the additional questions that help us to determine whether that's just a simple flu, no such thing, or a potential PUI is that travel history, especially anybody traveling through those areas that are the hot spots right now.
So aside from the travel, when you do suspect somebody who has the PUI, do you like get a background on them and where they've been and who they've been around? And I mean, I'm just curious about tracking.
Absolutely.
Like
for this
all of the
particular
history.
event, that is the additional questions that our 911 call takers are asking of people for calling for service. When our medics arrive on scene, they'll ask that question again just to either confirm or just get more information from that particular patient. So it is a series of questions that helps us to narrow down our suspicions.
Okay, I thank you again. Some of those questions, because it could easily, I mean, in a community as small as ours, and a community who has a lot of pre-existing conditions, it is a scary thought. What could happen, once we determine that someone is positive. And so I thank you for being in the front line, and I just pray for all of us. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Chief.
Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Does Senator Pito?
It's been a long day. Chief, thank you very much, and the rest of the panel up there for coming to us to give us your plans and everything else. But I just wanted to mention something about, do you have the complete hazmat coveralls? The real hazmat coveralls. I'm talking about those white coveralls and things like that. Do you have enough?
Well, so we're talking hazmat, or are we talking the PPEs to respond to a
No, I'm
potential
talking about the
PUI?
hazmat coveralls.
Okay, so hazmat coveralls for the purpose of the PUI is actually not necessary.
So you
The
don't-
disposable gowns, the eye protection, that satisfies the CDC requirement for proper personal protective equipment.
And I do understand that when you transport, what do you call that, PUIs?
Yes, Senator.
And I understand that you had mentioned that you wipe down the vehicles and everything like that. Do you have the disinfectant solution to spray the inside of that vehicle?
Yes, so we do. So we do have. So it doesn't always have to be a spray. There are wipes that we use to simplify it, almost like a baby wipe, but with a lot of cleaning capabilities. Just so they're viral wipes, and so that they help to kill any viruses that are on the surfaces of the vehicle. Then there are spray solutions that we can use if necessary. At present we have the cleaning capabilities, but for like I've said, if we start seeing an uptick in responses to these events, we will be reaching out to our resources and making sure that we have those proper cleaning equipment. Yes.
Okay, I was in the Philippines several weeks ago, Chief, and practically all the hotels, whoever comes, to the hotel, they have this temperature detector. Then they put it right out front your forehead. Do you have those?
So we have thermometers. We don't necessarily have the fancy ones like they do in the Philippines.
Not the thermometers that you put in your mouth or you
Correct.
put it
So there
under
are
your arm.
different types.
I'm talking
of,
about just taking that thing and putting right on the forehead.
Right. That is a type of thermometer. So they do a scan over the front of the forehead. There's temporal.
So you do have those.
Tympanic for the ear. There's for the mouth.
Yeah. Okay.
So there are just different types of thermometers. That's just one version of a thermometer. But we do have the ability to measure temperature when it's necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I think that should end the questions. Senator Therese, do you have any questions? Immediately after Senator Therese, we're going to wrap this one up unless there are really any questions on the bill. And I thank the chief and everybody else that showed up to provide information. Senator Therese.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for coming down, and to all of your team. And thank you for, the input that you gave at that tabletop exercise. I thought that was very helpful, and it is very broad. So I know that your responsibility is huge, and you're on the front lines, as my colleagues have said. So I feel like your role is very critical. And so I hope you don't mind if we ask you some questions. We have a bill before us that, it's to authorize additional money to be spent for these items as they read to you earlier. And really the issue is, of course, we want to give whatever's necessary, but it's just a little bit different process because we're here without any public hearings, and we're here without any real requests, for example, from the fire department that this is what we need, can you help us get this stuff? And so, of course, Department of Public Health is coordinating everything, and as you said, you've sent all your needs to somebody else. But they're not conveyed to us at this point. And we're trusting that, okay, so they're okay, but, Mr. Byrne is saying, no, they could use this money. So we just want to make sure that if we do authorize it, that it goes to exactly where it's needed and most effective, especially for, people like you and your medics. So one of the first things at that tabletop exercise was the representative from CDC. We have a representative on Guam from the CDC, and his presentation was shocking to me because one thing he put on the slide was there's a major global PPE shortage. Plan that our current PPE stock on Guam is all we will have, don't waste it. And I was shocked because, of course, I thought, oh, does that mean we're not getting any more? But of course, then after that, we've heard subsequent press releases about money coming from the federal government and equipment that they have, PPEs. I think that was one of the items specified that they were going to make available. And so I guess I wanted to just ask you if you could share with us, what is it that you said you are in need of at this point? Because you've also said today that if there's an uptick in the incidences, then you're going to reach out for more equipment, more cleaning supplies. But I don't know, I guess I thought our response to this was to get fully stocked in advance of any uptick in incidences so that we don't have to chase that down later on.
No, and I appreciate the question, Senator. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not just a Guam challenge; it's a nationwide challenge. And as such, there is a queue of people that are trying to get their respective personal protective equipment for their respective jurisdictions. Right now, and probably to the doctor's point was, because we do have what we have, we don't want to be wasteful. We want to be very frugal with it, and so the training that we've been passing on and things of that nature helps us to maximize or not wastefully, because we don't want to just keep putting on masks just because we come across somebody who may be coughing. There are other questions that help us elevate our sense of awareness and alertness. And as such, we help to preserve that stockpile that not even a stock, that supply that we do have. Now, I will tell you that the governor and lieutenant governor from the very beginning for the past month and a half have already been addressing this with us, and they've been engaging with us and making sure that we have that constant dialogue going. And just as importantly, what are those needs? And so we've been providing needs assessments to the administration so that they can raise that up. And I believe it was today where the governor actually, said, "Hey, we need some of that money that's going to be made available to the jurisdictions, and this is our needs." And so they're working very hard to make sure that we address the response, that we're properly trained and we're properly equipped to do that response. It's in everybody's best interest that we try to keep this at our borders, and ultimately we'd like to just keep it off the island. But I think as much as we're going to try to do that, it's inevitable that it's going to wind up coming up. Look, we already had 3 PUIs today.
Thanks. So what are the needs that the fire department has conveyed?
Right now, through the collaborative effort between the 3 agencies, the 4 of us, we've been able to fill those needs. There is always going to be a need to replenish supplies, and like Mr. Byrne has already said, that we can always use money. I'm not going to turn down money, Senator. So
I know, but what are you going to use it for? That's what we want to know. What is it that you feel? Are you saying you don't need another ambulance, that even if we take one off commission for an hour to sterilize it, that we are in adequate supply, or that you don't need additional PPEs because we're going to use what we have? I want to know exactly what it is that you feel we have a need for. And if it's not any of those, then is it something we don't know about, I guess.
So one of the things I'm very proud about the Guam Fire Department is the fact that we always strive to make things work. We're very mission focused, and the professionals that exist within the Guam Fire Department it's very awe-inspiring. As the leader of the organization, they do phenomenal work, and despite any challenges, they always seem to make things work. you know, supplies are always going to be the challenge, but we do everything. We work with the administration. We work with our partners and to answer those needs. I think we do a very good job at doing that. You know,
I have no doubt that you are doing a great job. Yeah, I guess I just want to know if there's a list that was submitted, that you have these needs and this is what we should prioritize, or whether I wanted to know whether there's things on your list that are not being ordered because they're like out of stock, or as you say, we're in line to get those, and so that you have to work around that and you have to plan that we are not going to get certain type of equipment or something.
I think
What is our status of your needs versus how they're fulfilling your needs versus like longer term needs that, we got to get in on that list as soon as possible.
And we've been doing that. So like I mentioned earlier, we've been providing those lists and they've been transmitting those needs to those that are going to help us to fill those needs. Because again, and I apologize for repeating myself.
We're being asked today to help you. I don't mean to interrupt, but we're being asked today to help. That's why we're sitting in here for hours now, and I just want to know, more exact, what are the needs? I mean, from the fire department. I think the people of Guam would feel very confident, instead of hiding that we have needs, to know these are our needs and this is what we're looking for anybody's help with.
Yeah,
Excuse me?
I'm not hiding any needs. I mean, we're addressing the needs. And so, again, I'm in active discussion with the administration. As a matter of fact, with regards to vehicles, we've got 2 ambulances that are due in. I've been working with the governor, lieutenant governor, to address the needs to do a replacement of our fleet. And so, I'm not hiding any needs. We're definitely addressing those needs, and the administration is listening, and so we are working towards filling those needs.
All right. Are the PPEs, the protective gear that you have now, that you're saying CDC, that's all they require you to use, is that consistent with what is being used in other fire stations across the states? Or are they using the hazmat gear as the other senator suggested?
I can't, I'm not certain what other jurisdictions are doing. I know we here on Guam are staying very consistent with the CDC guidelines. I'm sure there's variations out there for the most part, but from my understanding is that the majority of the jurisdictions, and again, I can't speak for all jurisdictions, are absolutely adhering to the CDC guidelines.
So are you satisfied with that, with the gear that you are asking your medics to use?
Yes, we are absolutely satisfied with it.
All right, and are those single use or are they reused?
So they're disposable items, yes.
All right, and so I know that, the speaker asked you how many firefighters you have, but let's say how much gear do you have? How many patients or uses do you have potentially at this point right now?
So we have just reconciled and re-inventoried to make sure that we identify whatever shortfalls we might have. I'm very happy with the fact that we have answered our immediate needs, but again, we have transmitted what we would feel would be the sustainment of our supplies. And again, everybody's working towards satisfying that supply. And again, it's not just Guam. It's throughout the nation that's having these challenges. And so, we're always going to be challenged with supplies. I think that's kind of systemic, and we're going to work with what we have. And if we should need more, we will ask for more. And it's my understanding that we have those resources that we can kind of share with each other.
So are you not asking for any more? You haven't told me how many uses you have available to you today here on Guam, and whether you're asking for more PPEs.
Right, and so I wish I had those numbers because we just reconciled all of that, and so I did receive the report from our EMS Bureau with regards to how many items we do have currently in inventory. I'll be happy to share that with you once I get back to the office. I'll be able to share that. But it is a supply and demand need. So as we use our supplies, they replenish those supplies. So, right.
All right.
And Chief is just sharing, it's that nationwide demand that's going on as well.
Right,
so.
of course, that's why we're concerned, because there's a nationwide shortage, they told us, then there's a nationwide demand now, and everybody's going to be lining up for these things, and I just want to know if we have any progress in bringing more in for you, and what is our limitations at this point? Our understanding is that we're severely limited at this point, but, you know, we're all guessing, and if we can't get concrete numbers, we're still guessing, and Mr. Chair, I guess I just going to put that on the record that we're not getting a concrete answer as to how many potential, you know, incidences can the GFD handle with the gear they have right now.
I wish I was able to predict that, Senator.
All
This
right.
way we can probably say I need 100, I need 1,000. I'm not sure what that.
No, I mean, how many do you have?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That tells us how many you can handle, right, with gear. Otherwise, you're handling it without gear, and I guess
Okay.
that's, you know, we're concerned about that.
Right.
Maybe, Chief, you could provide that. If you can provide it now, I understand, because I know you weren't prepared for that, but
Right. Senator, I'm happy to share that
All
those
right.
numbers with you. I'll make sure once we get back to the office.
Again,
we'll
Chief, you know, it's just that they're, you know, everyone's saying, oh, we have this urgent need, and I'd like to just be more specific as to where really the urgent needs are and where we are very, you know, prepared, you know, or very satisfied with what we have, or, you know, I kind of want to know our capacity also. For example, we know what GMH can handle, how many isolation units they have available, very limited, and throughout the island combined, still very limited. When you talk about equipment for breathing, ventilators, extremely limited. So I guess I wanted to know, since you're the first responders, you know, what is our response limitations? Do we have any? You know, and I think they're limited by equipment, by protective gear. I would hope you're not going to send anyone out without those. I mean, you know, that I don't know what we're going to do if we
No.
run out, but
So the safety of our firefighters is paramount for us, and so we will not send firefighters out without the proper protective equipment. As far as ventilators are concerned, those are over at the hospitals.
I'm just using that as an example,
Okay.
as a limitation. So for your limitations, yeah, what are they? You know, their number
so
of vehicles that you can transport people in, the number of gear that you have available for your medics to use or whoever's going out. The, I don't know what else. I mean, that's why I'm asking. All right. So when we went through the plan, were you able to, there were suggestions made, and then we, of course, it was an updating exercise, so as you said, things had to be added into that plan, especially in regards to this particular disease. So did you, do you have a final product of that plan? The response plan, or the pandemic plan?
I don't have that with me this evening, but I know it is all it all has been, because there was several changes and several different updates and revisions to it, and so they're cleaning that whole product up.
When do you expect that?
Chief is reminding me that the 18th of March we're actually having a meeting on that final plan.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking about that is because then you said today we had 3 incidences already. And so I just want to make sure that everyone across Guam, that's one of our questions that we want to know. And that it's not like we don't want you to be bothered here, but we're still, you know, can't tell if everybody across the board is on the same page. You know, do we have that final plan? Are they ordered to comply with it, or is it voluntary, you know, and things like that. So for the incidences that occurred today, when the doctor says this patient has to go to the hospital, normally they would call an ambulance transport to a hospital. But I guess one of these patients was home quarantine, you said? So who decides that patient should be home quarantined versus going to the hospital?
So that's the medical provider in consultation with public health.
Public health.
That's correct.
And
is there anything further? I want to make sure we wrap this up, because I know I got a text from the governor that he wants to sit down and talk to you folks because of the patients. So I just wanted to, if I know you have, I don't know how many more questions you have, Senator Therese, and I'm hoping my colleagues understand that we need to wrap this up and get back on the bill. And the questions are great, good information, but we just need to get the chief here to give us a full report. Where are you at? Because I like to ask that from GMH. I like to ask that from public health. I like to ask that from the police department. I like to ask from everybody that's related to the events. Because I know you're not the only one running around the street. I mean, I don't say that literally.
That's correct.
You know, when you're going down the street, you got to get the escort.
Mr. Chair,
But
if I may
Senator Therese,
finish, yes. So,
please, we'll wrap this
Chief,
up.
do you have any knowledge of an additional case that might have come from the Navy Hospital today? Did they report to you if they receive a case? I mean, or a suspected, what do you call it, a person under investigation, a PUI? If there were others that you were not handling, would you be informed?
Right. So actually, there is a chat group that involves Naval Hospital and their doctors there. So any information that's out there, they're absolutely sharing that crosstalk. If they find something, if they learn something new, if there's a new presentation, they are sharing that, because what they may see in there, we might see on the outside. So there's open dialogue that's going on a regular basis. Again, because it's evolving every day, and again, like I said, what we plan for today might change tomorrow, and so there is, there is constant dialogue going on, meetings, just regrouping, making sure that we're all on the same sheet of music and that we're all practicing the same CDC recommendations, and I will tell you that. It is a very collaborative effort. We're taking it very seriously. The governor and the lieutenant governor have made it so that we have this ability to be able to have these discussions, and when we provide that feedback to them, and they're doing everything that they can to answer our needs.
All right, I'm sure you can appreciate that here at the legislature, because we're being asked to, we also want to be part of the collaboration. We want to know what it is that we're trying to fund. We want to know what the goals are so that we can find other ways to get there also. The more we know, I think the better job that we can do to help you, Chief. This is not something that, I think the more we know your needs, the better. And it's very not clear to us right now. But finally, do you feel like the medics are satisfied with the gear that is available to them?
So the gear that we're providing to them meets the standards
CDC
for.
standards.
So absolutely. Again, their safety is very important to me, and so to not provide them the very best of equipment that we can possibly afford or is available to us is counterintuitive to me.
My final question, Mr. Chair, is this. So as of right now, because you said it evolves as this goes on, but as of right now, what is the outstanding order or, command? I don't know who gives this, or procedure. What do you do when you have a patient? Do you take them to the nearest hospital, or are we now under orders that anyone who is a PUI is going to go to GMH, or is GMH the hot spot now? Because this is the first I'm hearing of that part. We were trying to come up with a quarantine area so that GMH patients would not be so severely impacted.
So what I can share with you, Senators, tonight, that is the practice. There is ongoing discussions to identify different facilities to be able to either isolate, to take care of acute care patients, isolate, or quarantine. Where I suspect that by the week's end we'll have some more clear answers. But again, like I said, since it does change on a daily basis, today that is the practice.
All right, and so there's no arrangement with the Naval Hospital to transport anybody there at this point?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Chief.
Senator.
Thank you
very
to
much,
all of you.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick clarification. I need just really quick, sir.
Quick clarification.
Okay,
Please be quick
Chief-
because I will dismiss the panel.
Okay,
The
Chief,
governor is calling, and this is the second time I'm getting a text.
Okay, Chief, you mentioned.
There's a lot of things going on.
Okay, we were talking about decontamination, and I allowed my other colleagues to ask you to go to the walkthrough on what happened today with the firefighters who answered this call. And it was mentioned that after they dropped the patient off, then your firefighters then took off their clothing, the PPDs, they took it off. But I was under the assumption they went through what's called a decontamination chamber. Now, can you tell me, did they go through this chamber? Because from what I gather, taking off contaminated clothing still has the possibility of getting infected. So again, did they go through the decontamination chamber?
So they went through a decontamination process.
Not a chamber.
So the chamber is more related to a hazmat response. So where there is doffing of the hazmat suit, because they may have come into contact with powder, with liquids, things of that nature, and so they doff in a different procedure. So going through that decontamination line or that chamber that you're mentioning is a different procedure than what we do for this particular response.
This particular virus?
Particular virus, yes.
And you're saying that the hospitals have a decontamination chamber when I asked earlier?
So they don't have a chamber, Senator. It's a decontamination room, an isolation room. So it's kind of a room set apart from everybody else, so that when we are taking off this equipment, that we minimize any potential for cross-contamination.
Okay.
And then we properly bag it, and then it's properly disposed of.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. My colleagues, I will be dismissing the panel. You know, there are situations that they need to take care of in relation to what we're doing tonight. So I thank the panel, director, chief, assistant chiefs for coming tonight, and also the director of OFB. And then we will continue with, thank you for coming. We will now continue on with final with the author of the bill for her amendment or closing.
Thank you.
Why don't we do a 2-minute recess while the panel is leaving? My colleagues, we have returned from recess. Senator Therese, you have the floor, and you do have an amendment.
I
You do
do, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I'd also like to close on the bill since you're closing up our discussion on this matter. And I totally support that if the executive branch needs money, that we're going to find money, we're going to give it to them to deal with this. If the hospital needs equipment, that hopefully we're going to get them the equipment. I think it's very common sense that we have needs. We know there are needs out there in every agency in order to deal with this. And we are, I think, trying to be very respectful, of people's time, trying to be very respectful of protocol, that they will handle it. They've told us they will handle it, and that they will let us know when they need our help. But today we have a bill before us, and I just want to feel like this is just not optics, that it's actually, well-intended, and that it's trying to achieve or going to achieve a purpose they're not able to achieve right now. So I was glad that Mr. Byrne came and was able to testify that way, that they want this bill, they want the additional authorization to spend some money on these particular purposes. Because we've departed from our regular procedures quite significantly, Mr. Chair. We've not had a public hearing on this bill. We've not really given any of the agencies time to give any input, let alone the public. And so I take that very seriously. But as the speaker declared, there are very serious circumstances affecting the potential health and safety of the people of Guam. But I don't like the idea of going forward or allowing processes to take place without actually getting the information that we are asking. I feel like every day the legislature allows that to happen, we weaken the body that has been in place for decades, and more importantly for me, it's at a time when we are facing a crisis, information is one of the most important things that we can do. Pass that out freely, share it, keep it responsible, but that's what we're trying to do here. And so I think it's no time for a gag order on agencies or anything like that. It should really be the opposite. And I understand the concern about spreading rumors or spreading fear, but still, we are the government of Guam. We have to answer just as much as anyone else to what is the government of Guam doing? Are you keeping us safe? I would love to be able to answer that to everyone I meet, that we are doing everything we possibly can. But it's very hard if we can't get answers to the questions, as we ask. And I think the most serious side effect of that is that at a time when trust is our most important commodity, trust is what we might erode. If you guys think I have a lot of questions, imagine people who are watching. They must have a million more, even based on some of the answers. Or, we're in the middle of the first day of 3 POIs in one day, persons under investigations in one day. It's significant, and I just don't, so I can't stress enough the importance of not cutting off debate, not cutting off questioning, not forcing everyone to be transparent. Be transparent in these times. It's very important to build trust of the community. It's not just of each other. It's the community. We need to build their trust too. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing my extended questioning that I was able to, and some of the answers that we were able to get. And so in furtherance of this transparency, I would offer this amendment that's been passed out, and it would be to add a new section to the bill that reads, in order to foster transparency and better assess I think I spelled that wrong, but better assess the adequacy of transfer authority authorized by this act, within 5 days of passage of this act, Manga Hagen Wahan shall report to the Speaker of Alessa, Turin, Wahan, and the Office of Finance and Budget on any transfers made pursuant to Public Law 3561 or other authority during FY20 or from FY 2020 appropriations. Failure to submit the reports by the required deadline in this section shall result in repeal of any further transfer authority. And the reason for this is just because we're authorizing by this bill now transfer authority. It has very direct impacts on agencies. I'm seeing this with, you know, the child custody fund, the treatment of children. Public health had huge transfers from 2019, and we just, it's our job to keep tabs of those transfers, to try as much as possible to when there is going to be impact on an agency, to take care of that in any way that we can. And so I just feel like for the transfers, if you know, we're going to authorize additional transfer authority by this bill, that we should do that in a very knowledgeable way so we know what effect transfers have had so far. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Therese. Thank you for this amendment. Does any of my colleagues would like to speak on this amendment? If not, are there any objection to this? Yes, Senator Lee.
Mr. Chair, I think, you know, with all due respect to all of my colleagues, I believe there was a discussion earlier in the day in terms of punitive responses. And I think that the administration has sent their representatives today, and they've participated in good faith discussions with us about this potential threat, about this threat. And we've had a good dialogue with them, and I would like to continue a good dialogue with them. And I think hamstringing them and not allowing the governor to have further transfer authority, failure to submit the reports by the required deadline in this section shall result in repeal of any further transfer authority. I think if our agencies are having difficulty meeting the deadline, you know, we might want to give them an additional opportunity. Maybe they can write us a letter to extend the deadline by 1 or 2 days if they're inundated with doing the work of a government, like they had, like our fire department had to run out of here because they had other very important business to attend to. We understand they're a 24-hour operation. And so in the same respect, I just want to caution my colleagues and just have us take a second and really consider what we're asking here. Mr. Chair, I just feel like
I have a question.
this is it's a pretty big stick, and I just want to offer that bit of caution.
Thank you. Madam Speaker?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I do apologize. Just hearing from the previous speaker, I just wanted to ask, I thought that we had entertained an amendment to that if there was a violation, then there would be a
$250.
assess of $250 fine. Does this supersede that? Can we just ask legal?
That's a different section.
I think we need to ask legal to take a look at that, because that was offered on line 18 to 23,
Yeah,
page
it's
3.
a different section of the bill. This is to add a new section to the bill.
Right. But I'm just curious, if legal can comment,
Does it in any way? What? Does it? I can't hear.
okay, it's a new section from legal. Senator Lee, you have a...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I agree with the...
If you can state the question, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the last sentence of this amendment, it says failure to submit the reports by the required deadline in this section shall result in repeal of any further transfer authority. What would we have the administration do if there has been no transfer? So are they still required to submit a report telling us that there were no transfers, or what do we do in that scenario if the transfer authority was not used?
Senator Therese, do you yield to the question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. Yeah. No, the intended mechanism is similar to current mechanisms for transfer authority in the most recent budget bills. That is, if there is a transfer, it must be reported to the Speaker within 5 days. And so we heard today testimony that there have been transfers from 2020 appropriations, or there may have been, we're not sure, that were not reported. And so this would just require that those be reported. And I don't think it's a huge duty on any of these agencies, because in order to do a transfer, you have to know where you're getting this money from. I mean, that's the whole nature of a transfer. Where is it coming from and where does it go to? And that's exactly what the reports show. They're not really complicated. They're just a listing, a spreadsheet of agency, amount, where it's taken from, and then agency to, and that's all.
All right. Senator Lee?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So would that be potentially two separate and distinct reports that would need to be filed if there are multiple transfers?
Senator Therese, do you?
It's up to them how they file it at once or on separate occasions, but it's just supposed to cover every transfer. Yeah.
Does that suffice? Senator Lee? Not really? I have a simple question I normally, Chair, shouldn't be asking, but this only relates to this bill, right? This is not about the Budget Act of the Transfer Authority. I want to make sure we're very selective, because the Budget Act does
That's
authorize.
correct. So the Transfer Authority in the Budget Act already gives a mechanism very similar to this.
Right.
That still remains intact. This bill and the earlier provision also puts a mechanism that they're going to report if they actually utilize this bill for transfer.
Right.
And this part says, because we want to accumulate, the transfers or add them all up. This bill just says if there's any other transfers that occurred for FY 2020 funds, that they're going to also report those, and that way we can add those and see whether this is sufficient or not.
So you're saying that this section will impact the Budget Act? No, it's only specific to this Bill 308, correct? It's only about the pandemic fund. If they transfer funds into the
It
funds.
affects transfers that have not been reported, but transfers pursuant to the Budget Act, those have been reported to us
Correct.
already.
That's
The
right.
$25,000 for the joint election, that was it.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's anything that was not covered by the Budget Act that are impacting our 2020 ability to transfer.
Okay, so it's only for 308. Well, maybe you can ask the question, Madam Speaker, so that I'm not asking
Maybe
the
just
question.
for a clarification based on this, Mr. Chair, if I may, because she's saying that the reporting requirements that we already have, and as stated earlier, that on the previous section, there was a fee of $250 to go to mental health, I think, but this says on any other transfers made pursuant to the public law. So the question you had brought up was, does this affect the Budget Act, Public Law 3561? Yes, it does. And you're saying that there's already been requirements, so maybe just to ask legal for that interpretation?
Okay, well, there's a short recess now. Consult with legal. My colleagues, we're back from recess. Senator Therese, you have the
Thank you,
floor.
Mr. Chair. Yes, I'd like to make a couple minor amendments to this at the request of my colleagues. So on the second line where it says within 5 days of passage of this act, if we could change it to within 5 days of enactment of this act, and if I could do that without putting it in writing, Mr. Chair. So the word passage, change it to the word enactment.
All right. And then,
If we could deal with that one, Mr. Chair,
that's it?
there's
Or-
one more after
Oh,
that.
there's more? Okay, so does any of my colleagues have any, would like to speak on it? If not, are there any objection? We're only doing one word change first. We're going piece by piece. Passage to enactment. Pass. Senator Therese?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So and then on the last line, where it says, shall result in repeal of any further transfer authority, we're going to change that to read, result in repeal of any transfer authority, so take out the word further, so any transfer authority authorized by this act. And that's to take care of your concern, Mr. Chair, that it does not impact the budget transfer authority, budget law transfer authority.
Thank you. Do I have any of my colleagues would like to speak on that amendment?
I'll repeat it one more time.
Repeat it one more time.
Sure.
Thank you.
It will now read, shall result in repeal of any transfer authority authorized by this act. So we're adding the words authorized by this act and removing the word further.
It was very specific, my colleagues. It does not relate to the Budget Act. It's all focused on this bill only. If she doesn't report it, the transfer authority that we've given here is repealed. Am I correct, Senator Therese? Does everybody understand that? Legal, is that the proper explanation? My colleagues, does anyone like to speak on this amendment? Senator Kelly.
Sujuis Masi, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm interpreting this correctly. So this is, I just want to be able to ask for clarification that this is just a one-time reporting of transfers.
A one-time reporting transfer?
Right, it's not an ongoing situation. It's just, it's requiring that within 5 days of the enactment of this act, there will be that one-time requirement to provide information about these transfers.
Transfers every time you do the act, the transfer, you have to report it. Or you don't
Right,
see that?
That's in another section. I mean, this one where it's asking for transferred made pursuant to 3561 or other authority during FY 2020 or from FY 2020 appropriations. So I think in another portion, it says that yes, there's going to be reporting after every transfer as related to this act.
That's correct, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yes, it does exactly that. So there are two provisions in this law. One is that for every transfer pursuant to this law, they report within 5 days. This is to catch up. It's pretty much a catch-up phrase, and so it's going to, anything that we've missed for FY 2020, we're not going any further back, that they're going to report that because this is being taken out of appropriations from 2020, and we want to just be very clear how that's impacting the agencies going forward. And that's all, and I appreciate that question. Thank you.
Sujuis Masi for the answer, and it provides a lot of clarity, and it helps us understand that it's just a catch up, and then the other provision kicks in, but this one is just that one-time catch-up to understand where we're at. Sujus Masi for providing the answer.
Senator St. Augustine, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I understand the intent of the amendment, but I'm still worried as the appropriation chair. On the line there, shall report to the Speaker of the Legislature, Guam, and Office of Finance on any transfers made pursuant to Public Law 3561 or other authority. I would actually move that we strike that. Of any transfers, strike pursuant to 3561 because 3561 does not apply to 308. Let's start with that. The FY20 authority during FY20 and 2020 appropriation, the 308 has not been, if it was passed earlier, I can understand that, or before the Budget Act. But I just have, something's telling me something, and unless legal can tell me that the verbiage here is clear, we're not going back on time. In other words, if it's revealed that a transfer, if this act is passed, and a transfer had happened last week, for example, that means this act basically repeals the transfer authority in the Budget Act. It doesn't? I just need confirmation before. I mean, I'm in support of the intent, but I just want to protect what we've been doing since before October when we approved the Budget Act in October 2019. We still got 7 more months to go. And I don't want, I just want to make sure that that's protected, okay? And I just need to make sure that the legal is saying that the verbiage does protect what's going on. Anything that happens on 308 that they need to transfer to make sure we're transferring for the pandemic fund, then if they don't account for it, then we repeal that act. I can agree to that. If they don't properly report the transfer to this fund that we're addressing 308, then yes. If they don't do that, then we repeal it. We repeal their authority to transfer. And I think everybody can agree to that. If they can't be held accountable, then it's not fair. Thank you.
Senator St. Augustine, thank you.
On a point of information, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Madam Speaker, go ahead.
I'm the only reason why I'm concerned about this, and like I said, I do support the intent of the reporting. It's just that if we're looking at the 2020 appropriations and what we've supported earlier in earlier amendments, we are taking from Public Law 3564. And that's why I'm saying we're already governed by language that is already put in statute by that law. So that is my only concern. And as the speaker from Tumuning was sharing that train of thought, I felt it crucial to bring up the fact because this is what we're dealing with. So my train of thought on thinking on why because believe me, I want the reporting requirements, but to do this, and we already have provisions in place in statute on Public Law 3564, I think we're just killing it. We're killing that statute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before we go any further on this particular discussion, because it sounds like Senator St. Augustine may be proffering an amendment, I think we still need to dispose of a motion that's currently on the floor, which is the amendment by Senator Terlahi to change authorized by this act to add those words. So we haven't disposed of that motion yet, so I'd like to deal with that motion first, and then we can continue to discuss any further discussions along this line. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So on Senator Terlahi's amendment to add the words authorized by this act, which is an amendment to the amendment, is there any further discussion?
Deleting the word further.
I apologize. The clerk's just corrected me. It's actually to delete the word further and add the words authorized by this act, correct? Are there any objections to this amendment? If not, Senator Terlahi, would you like to close? On the amendment to the amendment. So if there are no objections to the amendment proffered by Senator Talahi to delete the word further and add the words authorized by this act, no objections, motion passes. On the main amendment, Senator San Augustine, did you want to proffer an amendment to the main amendment?
Mr. Chair, after speaking with legal, the section there, the transfer made pursuant to Public Law 35.61 is referring to the war claims and authority during FY 2020 and FY 2020 appropriation does not jeopardize the transfer authority that's in the Budget Act. Hearing that and making sure I state it for the record, then I will not move any further. It doesn't impact the Budget Act, but anything, basically, just as stated, the war claims, if there was any transfer, then report it to us. If there's no transfer, then there's no transfer. If there's any transfer in any of the appropriations, they need to report it. And they need to report it like, if this bill is passed, within 5 days, everything. Close the books, basically, and tell us what you transferred, and we'll be okay. We'll just live with it because it's reported. It's not like we can go back and change the rules. It'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else wish to comment on the amendment proffered by Senator Talahi? Any objections to the amendment? No objections. Amendment passes.
All right, my colleagues, we have an amendment introduced by Senator Tello. Ma'am?
Sujus Masi, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this opportunity. You know, after speaking with the fire department and discussing certain equipment they need, especially certain clothing, and to ensure that our first responders are very well protected, I proffered an amendment just in the section of line 15, page 3. And it just incorporates the word equipment and protective apparel. I know it's not limited to on some of the things in this bill that it's going to be allowed for purchasing, but it's important to us to ensure that and make no doubt and make it clear that these particular protective apparel and other equipment are utilized and are incorporated in this legislation and utilized. The word equipment was once on here, but I think that just spelling it out clearly, I'm sure no one's going to bypass what its intent is, and is to protect once again, our first responders. You know, Mr. Chair, I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety out there right now. What's going on, and everyone here tonight, and we're all in full attendance here. This is how important it is right now, addressing this concern and letting know that this legislature is doing something about it. I like the word proactive. You use that word proactive. I've used it many times too, and I'm glad that this legislature is really utilizing it to its fullest on something just as important as this. So, Mr. Chair, I know it's a long night, but I proffer this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to this amendment? There being none, is there any objection? No objection. Motion passed. Amendment, motion passed. Now we are back to the speaker who will deliver her amendment and closing of the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, my colleagues have an amendment, and it's on page 4, line 6, and it's to add a new section G to read, proactive prevention and response effort must be in line with policies or guidelines as set forth by any of the following: the Government of Guam, the Guam Pandemic Response Plan or Guidance, the Guam Communicable Disease Response Plan, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Centers for Disease Control, or the World Health Organization. And again, just making sure that if any of these things trigger, then the authorization is there. So thank you. I hope my colleagues, Mr. Chair, I hope my colleagues support this amendment.
Any of my colleagues would like to speak on this amendment? There being none, any objection to the amendment? Senator Sabina Paris, you have an objection or you like to speak?
I have a point of inquiry.
Okay.
So regarding, it says, in the amendment, it says any of the following. So it leaves it open to selecting one of the following items. I'm just have a question regarding, so in preparation or in anticipation of getting federal funding, I'm sure the federal government has strict guidelines on how the money's actually used. So my question is, would this be sufficient to ensure sorry. I think that perhaps rather than having any of the following, I think all of the following would be
Mr. Chair.
beneficial, or at least some consideration in regards to, possibly getting reimbursement from the federal government, or just, I don't know, being in line with the federal government policies, I think is a critical thing. And especially with the pandemic response plan, I think these maybe are the minimum requirements.
If she would leave.
At least with the Guam pandemic response plan, I think that should be a minimum requirement to ensure that the use of the fund is prudent. Yeah, I think there should be some minimum requirement, I feel. Maybe that's not a question, it's a comment.
Senator Paris, I'm trying to follow you. We're on line 6, page 4. It is to add a new section. So your question is it sufficient? Is that what that's what generally you're asking? To add? Or are you proffering an amendment? Because I know that this was discussed earlier, that we should add this stuff, and that's why this amendment was introduced, was to add it, because it was discussed earlier. Not sure right now?
It just
Yes?
went through several iterations, and I think the first iteration was that it included all of the following, and now this amendment has, if I have the correct amendment, it says any of the following. So I just have a cause of concern that it doesn't have enough,
Okay.
guidelines, strict guidelines to ensure that the money is actually going towards
Ms.
I'm trying to follow what you're reading. Senator Castro, do you have something you want to add to maybe clarity or something? Because I'm just trying to follow what...
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the inquiry is a legitimate one, but I had some concerns, Senator, with the first iteration that went out. I just was concerned that it would be overly restrictive in terms of a compliance requirement. So if you required all of the, 5 that are delineated, you might not be in full compliance with what you're attempting to accomplish here. I think the good author of the amendment is just wanting to provide some guidelines or a framework that that serves as a benchmark, if you will, from some authority figure or some document that's been adopted by the government of Guam. Because one of our colleagues had an inquiry earlier about, what is it exactly that's going to guide the procurement process. So having looked at the Territorial Emergency Response Plan, these proactive preventive plans, they actually differ by agency and by threat. And so I'm not even sure if we were to require compliance with all of these particular cited agencies, entities, and plans, that it would even be within it. I can give you an example. So I was having a conversation with one of our colleagues about the critical infrastructure component of the Territorial Emergency Management Plan, and it was skeletal in nature. And so if we were to require a compliance provision for that specific plan, we would never fully meet the requirement because it's not even articulated. Does that make sense, Senator? So again, I think this gives us enough latitude for guidance without being overly restrictive. It's possible that there might not be a provision in any one or more of the entities or plans listed here. So that's my only concern.
Thank you, Senator Carroll. Senator Parrish, would you like to comment, make any further comments on this?
I appreciate the response by my colleague. Perhaps in the spirit of collaboration, perhaps there could be a person who could decide or have that discretionary ability to decide what sort of plans should be integrated, rather than just leaving it without any really strict requirements. So I don't know, I just would like maybe some collaboration on this, if possible.
Okay, maybe you might want to pose a question to the author of the amendment, and maybe she can explain a little bit more the reason for the amendment.
No, I understand the reasoning behind it. I just feel there should be some measure to ensure that it's following the intent of the fund, because the fund is an emergency pandemic fund. And so I feel like how we use the fund should be aligned with at least the Guam Pandemic Response Plan. I guess in the minimum, maybe the potential language is guidelines set forth with a minimum requirement of following the Guam Pandemic Response Plan.
Okay. So, is there an amendment would you like to proffer so we can
Yes, so
discuss this?
maybe, sorry, apologize, it's
No
late.
problem.
If I can get a quick recess on this.
You have an amendment you want?
Yeah, so basically the wording I would suggest is the guidelines set forth with a minimum of complying with the Guam Pandemic Response Plan.
Okay, where are you at so we know what
So this is the
our
perhaps-
colleagues can scratch? We can line out?
So probably in the second line, I would start it off in the second line. The guidelines that are set forth,
Okay, so you would follow what must be in line with guidelines?
after
Okay.
guidelines
Guidelines?
that follow the Guam Pandemic Response Plan at a minimum.
Oh,
And it-
okay,
And it could be informed by the other plans as well.
okay, so really it's just the amendments to add, to strike policy and put guidelines, right?
No, just keep policies and guidelines
Policies and guidelines.
at a minimum in line with the Guam Pandemic Response Plan.
At the minimum, right?
Yeah, that's using that as
Set forth, okay.
the floor of that.
Okay, Senator Lee, you have,
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully object to that amendment. I think that it's important that we have this wide-ranging set of policies or guidelines, because there may be something in our Guam Pandemic Response Plan that is much more localized, and we could be responding to something that is not yet here. We have not yet addressed even on a global scale. So I think it's important that we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of keeping ourselves open to additional information from the Centers for Disease Control, additional information from the World Health Organization, maybe something that has not yet been contemplated by either the Guam Communicable Disease Response Plan or the Guam Pandemic Response Plan, and also conversely, something that is very local, something that we're only on Guam we're experiencing that maybe CDC is silent on. So that we would need to rely on one of these. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this amendment was crafted in the way that it is, and it provides policies or guidelines set forth by any of these. So I think it's important that we have all of those at the table when we're having this discussion and not pinpoint one. I think it's important that we give ourselves the flexibility, especially because it's a very complex environment. It's changing every single day. It's dynamic. So I think we also need to give ourselves room to be flexible and dynamic in response.
so that's an objection to the amendment. to the amendment,
So-
by Senator Paris.
Wait, I have a point of information. So
Yes, Senator Paris.
I didn't intend to strike out everything else. I was just adding the language guidelines as set forth at a minimum by the Guam Pandemic Response Plan, but also informed by these other things. So I wasn't eliminating everything else. I just wanted to set a minimum standard.
Okay. Senator Therese, okay. Why don't we take a short recess so we can get this in writing, because I'm trying to read it myself. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, we have returned from recess. Senator Paris, you have a statement you want to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually withdraw my amendment to the amendment.
Okay. Are there any further? No, she withdraw her amendment on your amendment. Are there any other colleagues who would like to speak on the amendment? There being none, are there any objection to the amendment? None. Speaker, you will now close your bill 308 because your amendment is done.
Judge, I understand that, Mr. Chair,
You wanted to
but
close on it?
she didn't withdraw.
She did? Oh.
Withdraw, but we didn't affirm the no objection to her.
Did I do
No.
that? Okay, the clerk
Yeah.
told me I did it too quick. Senator
Withdraw.
Paris withdrew her amendment. Are there any objection to
No
that
objections.
withdrawal? None? Done.
And then.
Now we're
as-
back to the amendment proffered by the speaker. Are there any objection or
No
anyone would like to speak? None? Are there any objection? None? Pass. Now, Madam Speaker, you will now close Bill 308-35.
So I don't forget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't forget, I do know that I wanted to add a couple of members. I did ask my colleagues if anybody else wanted to be added on the sponsorship. So I want to add Senator Kelly March-Taitzino, Senator Luis Muña, a minority leader, and did I forget anybody? No. Vice Speaker Talina Nelson. Senator Therese? Yes or no? On the bill? Okay, okay, to add everybody. Yes.
My colleagues, there's a motion to add. Basically, everybody's on the list. Are there any objection?
No objection.
There being no objection, so ordered. Now,
Yeah,
please
thank you,
close.
Mr. Chair, and in the efforts, in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, I want to say thank you to all my colleagues again, and again, truly, this 35th Guam Legislature continues to step up to the plate to truly help our residents and make sure that our safeguards and our protocols in place, making sure that we have a safe Guam. And with that being said, Mr. Chair, I guess the motion is in order to move to rise from the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation that Bill number 308-35 LS and its amendments stay intact and to be placed in the third reading file.
On the motion, are there any objections? Hearing none, this motion carries. We stand in recess.
Let me go up.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I had my hand up.
What was that?
Oh, we're going to recess?
We're in recess now, so we
Just
can
to transition? Okay, sorry.
To transition.
transitioning. Yeah, that's why we're recessing.
Himina 85 na legislature in Guam is back from recess. At this time, I'm going to acknowledge the oversight chair on OFB. Senator Joseph Augustine, you are recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report back to the body that Bill number 308-35 LS was deliberated and amended in the Committee of the Whole with a recommendation to be placed on the third reading file for voting.
On that motion, without any objections, hearing or seeing none, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, please.
Madam Speaker, I ask that we recess until tomorrow at 11 o'clock after engrossment of the bill, and we move to voting at 11 o'clock tomorrow.
On that motion, without any objections, we are in recess to 11 o'clock a.m. tomorrow morning. Situs Masi, colleagues. Have a safe